The smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of machines should have been terrifying, but all I could think about was my phone buzzing with notifications I couldn't reach. What I didn't know was that those messages would reveal a cruelty so profound, it would shatter everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. My name is Quinn Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company in Chicago. 3 days ago, a drunk driver ran a red light and sent my Honda Civic spinning into a concrete barrier on Lakeshore Drive. Before I reveal what those messages contained, let me ask you something. Have you ever discovered that the people who should love you most are actually celebrating your suffering? Have you experienced that gut-wrenching moment when you realize your worst fears about family dynamics weren't paranoid thoughts, but painful truths? Please share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this. Morphine drip made everything hazy, but I remember fragments of that first night in the ICU. Broken ribs, punctured lung, severe concussion, fractured pelvis. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. My husband Marcus had been by my side constantly, his hand warm in mine, whispering reassurances about work, about our mortgage, about everything being okay. He'd stepped out to grab coffee and call my parents again. They lived in Phoenix, and were supposedly booking flights to see me. My sister-in-law Emma had been updating the family group chat, or so Marcus told me. Sweet Emma, always the peacemaker, always trying to keep everyone connected. She'd married Marcus's brother David 2 years ago, and I'd grown genuinely fond of her gentle nature and her way of diffusing family tensions with humor. The Thompsons, Marcus's family, had always been complicated, but Emma seemed to bring out their better sides. I drifted in and out of consciousness that first day, my body fighting to heal while my mind processed the trauma. The police had already been by to take my statement about the accident. The drunk driver, a repeat offender, had walked away with minor scratches while I lay connected to tubes and monitors. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd always been the careful one, the responsible one, the daughter-in-law who never caused drama or asked for too much attention. The mystery began with a leather portfolio that had somehow survived the crash intact. The paramedics had found it in my back seat and brought it with my other belongings. I'd forgotten it was even there. A client presentation I'd been working on for weeks, bound in expensive leather that Marcus had given me for my birthday. Inside were documents that would prove far more valuable than I could have imagined, though I wouldn't discover their significance until much later. Marcus's family had always been wealthy. Old money from his grandfather's real estate empire that had built half of downtown Milwaukee. The Thompson name carried weight in certain circles, and they'd never let anyone forget it. Marcus's mother, Patricia, ruled the family with an iron fist disguised as Southern charm. His father, William, was quieter but equally judgmental, measuring everyone's worth by their bank account and social connections. Marcus and his brother David had both inherited trust funds, though Marcus had chosen to work in nonprofit law rather than join the family business. I'd married into this family 5 years ago, and I'd spent every holiday, every gathering, every family vacation trying to prove I belonged. My own parents had died in a car accident when I was 26, another cruel twist of fate involving vehicles, and I desperately wanted to find that sense of family again with the Thompsons. I threw myself into their traditions, learned their inside jokes, sent thoughtful gifts for every birthday and anniversary. But there had always been subtle signs that I wasn't quite welcome. Patricia's backhanded compliments about my quaint apartment before Marcus and I bought our house. William's surprised reactions when I'd contribute intelligently to conversations about business or investments. The way they'd talk about Marcus's ex-girlfriend Sophia, who came from a good family and had gone to the right schools. David's wife Emma was different. She came from money herself. Her father owned a chain of successful restaurants across the Midwest, and she fit seamlessly into their world. The nursing staff had been incredible, checking on me every hour, adjusting my pain medication, helping me with the basics I couldn't manage alone. One nurse, Maria, had worked ICUs for 20 years and had a gift for reading people's emotional states alongside their vital signs. She'd noticed my anxiety about the phone calls that weren't coming, the visits that hadn't materialized, the silence from a family that should have been rallying around me. "Honey," she'd said during one of her checks, "sometimes when people are in shock, they don't know how to respond. Give them time." But something in her eyes suggested she'd seen this pattern before. Families who disappeared when things got difficult, who couldn't handle the messy reality of serious illness or injury. The leather portfolio sat on my bedside table, a reminder of the work presentation I'd been rushing to finish before the holidays. Inside were financial projections, market analysis reports, and a proposal that could secure the biggest client my company had ever landed. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for months, building a career that would finally prove to the Thompsons that I was successful in my own right, not just lucky to have married their son. What I didn't realize was that my phone, sitting silently on the bedside table with a cracked screen from the accident, contained messages that would reveal the true nature of the people I'd been trying so hard to impress. Marcus had been handling my communications, screening calls and texts to let me rest. He'd mentioned updates from his family, prayers and well wishes, concern about my recovery. But there were other messages, ones he hadn't shared, ones that would change everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and human decency. The first real clue that something was wrong came on my third day in the ICU. Marcus had been acting strangely, more protective than usual, almost aggressively screening my visitors and phone calls. When Dr. Peterson mentioned that my recovery was progressing better than expected and I might be moved to a regular room soon, Marcus seemed relieved in a way that didn't quite make sense. I was still in significant pain, still connected to multiple monitors, but his reaction suggested he'd been carrying some invisible burden. Emma had sent flowers, beautiful white lilies with a card that read, "Thinking of you always. Get well. Soon. Love, Emma and David." It was sweet, typical of her thoughtful nature, but when I asked Marcus about his parents' travel plans, he became evasive. "They're figuring out logistics," he said, avoiding my eyes. "You know how Dad is with last-minute flights." This struck me as odd because William Thompson had his own financial advisor book his private jet for business trips that came up with less notice than a family emergency. The mystery deepened when I asked Marcus to bring me my laptop so I could check work emails. The leather portfolio contained more than just my client presentation. It held copies of financial documents I'd been reviewing for a potential investment opportunity. Marcus's trust fund had significant restrictions, but there were ways to leverage it for business ventures with the right partnerships. I'd been quietly researching options that could help us become financially independent from his family's ongoing influence and subtle control. My phone finally worked after Marcus had it repaired, though he seemed reluctant to hand it over. "The screen protector is still setting," he said, but his tone carried an underlying tension I'd never heard before. When I powered it on, there were dozens of notifications. Work colleagues checking on me, friends from college, neighbors who'd heard about the accident. But scrolling through, I noticed something strange. No messages from Marcus's family group chat for the past 2 days. "Did your family stop using the group chat?" I asked him directly. Marcus froze in the middle of adjusting my pillow, his face going pale in a way that had nothing to do with the harsh hospital lighting. "No, they're just giving you space to recover," he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Something cold settled in my stomach, a feeling that had nothing to do with my physical injuries. The central object that would change everything was sitting right there in the leather portfolio, a copy of Marcus's trust fund documentation that I'd been reviewing for our investment research. Hidden among the standard legal language was a clause I'd never noticed before, something about family approval for significant life decisions, and beneficiary status contingent upon ongoing family relationships. At the time, I'd thought it was standard legal boilerplate. I had no idea it would become the key to understanding everything that was about to unfold. Dr. Peterson stopped by during evening rounds with news that lifted my spirits considerably. "Your lung is responding well to treatment, and your other injuries are healing ahead of schedule. If things continue improving, we might have you home by Christmas Eve." Christmas was still 10 days away, but the thought of being in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by our decorations and familiar comforts, felt like the first genuinely positive thing since the accident. Marcus's reaction was complicated, relief mixed with something that looked almost like panic. "That's great news," he said, but his voice lacked the enthusiasm I expected. "I should call my parents, let them know the timeline has changed." He stepped out to make the call, staying gone longer than seemed necessary for a simple update. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted again, more distant, as if he were processing information he didn't want to share. That evening, Emma visited alone. David was stuck at work, she explained, but she'd wanted to see me personally. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap and avoiding direct eye contact in a way that was completely unlike her usual warm, confident presence. "How are you feeling?" she asked, but her tone suggested she was really asking something else entirely. "Better each day," I told her honestly. "The doctors think I'll be home for Christmas." Emma's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, concern, and something that looked almost like guilt. "That's wonderful," she said, but her voice was flat. Have you been online much? Checking social media?" The question struck me as odd. "Marcus has been helping me stay offline to focus on healing," I said. "Why do you ask?" Emma's cheeks flushed pink, and she began digging through her purse with unnecessary intensity. "Oh, no reason. Just wondering if you'd seen everyone's holiday posts." She left shortly after, claiming David needed her to help with Christmas preparations. But her visit left me with more questions than answers. The way she'd asked about social media, the guilt in her expression, the nervous energy that was so unlike her usual composed self, it all pointed to something I wasn't being told. That night after Marcus had gone home to shower and grab fresh clothes, I made a decision that would change everything. Despite my injuries and the pain medication making me drowsy, I was going to figure out what everyone was hiding from me. The leather portfolio sat beside my bed, containing documents that might hold answers I hadn't even known I needed to find. And my phone, finally working again, contained messages that Marcus had been carefully filtering. The first major challenge came at 2:47 a.m. when I couldn't sleep and decided to check my phone properly for the first time since the accident. Marcus was at home, finally getting real rest after 3 days of sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair. The ICU was quiet except for the steady symphony of machines and the soft footsteps of night nurses making their rounds. My ribs ached with every breath, but my mind was sharp despite the pain medication. I started with the family group chat, scrolling back to find the last messages. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The chat had been active, very active, but I hadn't been included in the conversations. Somehow, I'd been removed from the group without realizing it. The last message I could see was from 4 days ago, Emma's update about my accident. Quinn was in a serious car crash. She's in ICU but stable. Marcus is with her. But there had to be more. I could see from Marcus's phone behavior, from Emma's nervous visit, from the strange way everyone was acting, that conversations were happening without me. I felt like I was watching a play where I'd been written out of scenes but was still expected to understand the plot. The realization that I'd been deliberately excluded from family communications while lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life was devastating. I opened Instagram, something I rarely used but knew the Thompson family was active on. Patricia posted daily, perfectly curated images of her garden, her charity luncheons, her designer purchases. William shared business articles and golf photos. David and Emma documented their travels and restaurant experiences. Marcus rarely posted, but he'd check in occasionally with work events or pictures of us together. What I found on Patricia's Instagram made me physically nauseous. Posted just yesterday, while I was still in intensive care with a punctured lung, was a series of photos from what appeared to be a family gathering. The caption read, "Blessed to have our whole family together for early Christmas celebration. Sometimes the best gifts are the people who truly matter. Family first. Christmas joy. Blessed." The photos showed Marcus's entire family around their dining room table, laughing and raising glasses in a toast. Marcus was there, smiling broadly in a way I hadn't seen since before my accident. David and Emma looked relaxed and happy. Even William was grinning, something he rarely did in my presence. They were all dressed up, clearly celebrating something significant. And I was nowhere to be found, not even mentioned in the caption as someone they were praying for or thinking about. The second suspense breadcrumb came when I noticed the timestamp on the photos. They'd been taken the same evening Marcus had told me he was going home to rest because he was too exhausted to think straight. Instead of resting, he'd apparently attended what looked like a celebration dinner with his family. While I lay in intensive care, connected to machines, fighting through the worst physical and emotional trauma of my life, my husband had been toasting something with the very people who had excluded me from their group chat. I scrolled through the comments, my heart pounding despite the pain medication. Patricia's society friends were commenting with heart emojis and congratulations. So wonderful to see the family together. You all look so happy. What a perfect evening. One comment from Patricia's sister Margaret stood out. About time. You could all relax and enjoy each other's company. The implications were staggering. Not only had they gathered without me while I was hospitalized, but the tone of the posts and comments suggested this was some kind of celebratory occasion. Patricia's caption about people who truly matter felt like a deliberate slight, as if my absence from their gathering was somehow a positive thing rather than a tragic circumstance. I checked David's Instagram next, finding similar photos from the same evening. His caption was shorter but equally telling. Family dinner with the people who matter most. Grateful for this time together. Family, chat's grateful, cha blessed evening. Again, no mention of me, no acknowledgement that one family member was fighting for. Her life in a hospital bed just miles away from their celebration. Emma's account was the most painful to review. She'd posted a single photo from the evening, a close-up of her and David with Marcus and his parents in the background. Her caption read, "Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you need it most, surrounded by love and support during difficult times. Family, support, grateful." The irony was crushing. She wrote about being surrounded by love and support during difficult times, while I, supposedly part of this family, was literally surrounded by machines and medical equipment, fighting through the most difficult time of my adult life completely alone. The hypocrisy was so blatant it felt intentional, as if they were deliberately crafting a narrative that excluded me from their definition of family. But what disturbed me most was Marcus's face in these photos. He didn't look like a man whose wife was critically injured. He looked relaxed, genuinely happy, more at ease than I'd seen him in months. Whatever they were celebrating, whatever had brought the family together in such obvious joy, it seemed to be enhanced by my absence rather than diminished by it. The complications escalated dramatically when I decided to check Facebook, a platform I'd avoided for months but knew contained more extensive family communications. What I discovered there shattered any remaining illusions about my place in WAM, the Thompson family hierarchy. Patricia had created a private Facebook group called Thompson Family Updates, a group I'd never been invited to join, despite being married to her son for 5 years. Through Emma's public posts, I could see glimpses of conversations happening in this private group. Comments like, "So glad we could finally discuss this openly," and "It's been such a relief to have honest conversations," suggested they'd been having significant family discussions while deliberately excluding me. The timing couldn't have been more cruel. They'd apparently been having important family meetings and conversations while I lay unconscious in intensive care. I found myself spiraling into a dark place I'd never experienced before. The physical pain from my injuries was manageable with medication, but the emotional pain of discovering my family's true feelings was overwhelming. Every breath hurt, every heartbeat felt like a reminder of how alone I really was. The people I'd spent 5 years trying to please, trying to fit in with, trying to prove myself worthy of, had been secretly celebrating my absence from their lives. The third suspense breadcrumb came when I discovered a public post on William's LinkedIn account that made everything even more confusing and hurtful. Posted 2 days after my accident, it read, "Grateful for family clarity during challenging times. Sometimes difficult situations reveal what truly matters and who truly matters. Looking forward to moving forward with renewed focus and purpose. Family, clarity, new beginnings." The business language couldn't disguise what felt like a direct reference to my situation. Difficult situations reveal what truly matters seemed to suggest that my near-death experience had somehow clarified for them that I didn't matter. Moving forward with renewed focus sounded like they were planning to proceed with something they'd been unable to do while I was active in their lives. Marcus returned to the hospital the next morning, looking refreshed in a way that contradicted his claims of exhaustion. He brought coffee and pastries from our favorite bakery, acting more attentive and affectionate than he'd been since the accident. But now I could see the performance in it, the way he was overcompensating for something. When I asked him directly about his family's plans to visit, he became evasive again. "They're still working out the logistics," he said, but his tone suggested he was reciting a rehearsed response. "Mom's been dealing with some charity board issues, and Dad has that big merger happening at work." These were the same excuses he'd been giving for days, but now I knew they were lies. His family had been together just 2 nights ago, celebrating something while I fought for my life. Dr. Peterson's morning rounds brought more good news about my physical recovery, but I could barely focus on his medical updates. My lung function was improving, my other injuries were healing well, and he was optimistic about my discharge timeline. "You're one of the strongest patients I've treated," he said. "Your body is responding remarkably well to treatment." If only he knew how much my emotional state was deteriorating even as my physical condition improved. The breaking point came when Emma arrived for another visit, this time carrying a gift bag that felt more like an apology than a genuine gesture of support. Inside was an expensive candle, a silk scarf, and a card that read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time. Love always, Emma and David." The gifts felt impersonal, like something you'd give to an acquaintance rather than a sister-in-law you supposedly cared about. "How are David's work projects going?" I asked, testing whether she'd mention anything about family gatherings or celebrations. Emma's face went through the same series of expressions I'd seen during her previous visit: surprise, guilt, and something that looked like panic. "Oh, you know David, always busy with something," she said vaguely. "And how are Marcus's parents? Handling everything?" I pressed further. "It must be difficult for them, having their son's wife in the hospital during the holidays." Emma actually flinched at this question, her hands fidgeting with her purse strap in a way that screamed discomfort. "They're processing everything. In their own way," she said carefully. "You know how private they can be about emotional situations." This was perhaps the most diplomatic way possible to avoid admitting that Marcus's parents were completely indifferent to my suffering, but Emma's obvious distress suggested she was struggling with whatever role she was playing in this family dynamic. The most devastating moment came when Emma's phone buzzed with a text message, and I caught a glimpse of the notification before she quickly turned the screen away. It was from Patricia. How did the hospital visit go? Did she suspect anything? The message confirmed my worst fears. This visit wasn't about checking on my well-being. It was reconnaissance, gathering information about my emotional and mental state for some purpose I couldn't yet understand. Emma left abruptly after that, claiming she had errands to run for David. But her hasty departure and obvious guilt told me everything I needed to know. Whatever the Thompson family was planning, Emma was involved despite her apparent discomfort with the situation. The people I'd trusted most were actively working against me while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. The major setback came that evening when Marcus arrived with Chinese takeout and an energy that felt completely wrong for someone whose wife was critically injured. He was almost cheerful, talking about work projects and holiday plans as if we were having a normal dinner at home rather than a hospital meal surrounded by medical equipment. His behavior had become so disconnected from our reality that I began to question whether I was losing my grip on the situation due to medication or trauma. "I talked to your boss today," he said casually while unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. "Sarah from HR called to check on you. I told her you'd probably need at least another month off work, maybe more depending on physical therapy requirements." This struck me as odd because my recovery was progressing faster than expected, and I'd been hoping to work remotely within a few weeks. Why was Marcus extending my medical leave beyond what was necessary? The fourth suspense breadcrumb emerged when I pressed him about his family's continued absence. "Your parents haven't even called the hospital directly," I pointed out. "Not once in 4 days. Don't you think that's strange?" Marcus stopped chewing his food, his face going through a series of calculated expressions that looked like he was choosing his words very carefully. "They're dealing with this in their own way," he said, echoing Emma's diplomatic language almost word for word. You know how uncomfortable Dad gets around hospitals, and Mom's been coordinating with me to make sure you get the space you need to recover. The rehearsed quality of his response was obvious, as if he'd practiced this explanation multiple times. But then he made a crucial mistake. Besides, he added, they're planning something special for when you're fully recovered. They want to make sure you're strong enough to properly appreciate their gesture. The way he said it suggested he'd revealed more than he intended, and his immediate attempt to change the subject confirmed my suspicion. That night, after Marcus left, I experienced the darkest moment of my entire ordeal. The physical pain was manageable, but the emotional devastation of realizing that my husband was lying to me, that his family was actively plotting something during my hospitalization, that I was completely alone in the world, sent me into a panic attack that brought nurses running to my room. Maria, the experienced ICU nurse who'd been taking care of me, sat with me until my breathing stabilized. "Honey, what's really going on?" she asked gently. "This isn't just about your physical injuries, is it?" Her kindness broke something inside me, and I found myself telling her everything. The social media posts, the excluded group chats, Marcus's strange behavior, Emma's reconnaissance visits. Maria listened without judgment, her expression growing more concerned as I detailed the evidence I'd gathered. "I've been a nurse for 23 years, she said finally. "I've seen families handle medical crises in every way imaginable. But what you're describing, this isn't normal grief or shock. This sounds like people who are using your situation for their own purposes." Her validation of my concerns gave me the strength to continue investigating. That night, when the hospital was quiet and I couldn't sleep despite the pain medication, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to access the leather portfolio properly and examine every document inside. If Marcus's family was planning something that required me to be incapacitated or absent, those legal documents might contain the clues I needed. The trust fund documentation was more complex than I'd initially realized. Hidden among the standard inheritance clauses were provisions I'd never fully understood. Section 12.3 dealt with beneficiary modifications due to family circumstances. Section 15.7 addressed trust fund access during periods of beneficiary incapacity. Section 18.2 covered emergency family decisions regarding trust fund management. As I read through the legal language more carefully, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Marcus's trust fund wasn't just his money. It was controlled by family vote under certain circumstances. If he were deemed temporarily incapacitated, or if there were significant family concerns about beneficiary decisions, his parents could assume control of the trust fund for up to 6 months while family matters were resolved. The most chilling discovery was in Section 21.4. In cases where the primary beneficiary's spouse is deemed detrimental to family unity or trust fund security, the family board may vote to modify inheritance structures to protect family assets. This wasn't just about Marcus's money. This was about removing me from any claim to Thompson family wealth permanently. But the truly devastating revelation came in the final pages of the document. There was a recent addendum, dated just 3 months ago, that I'd never seen before. It established new provisions for emergency family decision-making protocols and included specific language about incapacitated spouse scenarios and family asset protection during medical crises. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Marcus's family had been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity to implement their strategy. My accident hadn't just given them the chance to exclude me from family gatherings. It had given them the legal window they needed to remove me from their financial picture entirely. Little did I realize that the documents in that leather portfolio contained not just evidence of their plan, but also the key to stopping it. Hidden among my work papers was something that would turn their strategy against them, something that would expose their scheme in the most public and humiliating way possible. The turning point came at 6:30 a.m. when I discovered something in the leather portfolio that changed everything. Buried beneath my client presentation materials was a document I'd completely forgotten about, a copy of my own life insurance policy that I'd been reviewing for our financial planning. But this wasn't just any policy review. It was correspondence from my insurance company about a recent inquiry they'd received about my coverage, specifically about payout procedures in case of accidental death. The inquiry had been made 2 weeks before my accident. 2 weeks. Someone had been asking detailed questions about my life insurance benefits, claiming to be conducting family financial planning on my behalf. The insurance company had sent me a courtesy notification, which I'd filed away without reading carefully. Now, with everything I discovered about the Thompson family's behavior, this document felt like the smoking gun I'd been searching for. My hands were shaking as I read through the insurance company's detailed response to the inquiry. Someone had asked about payout timelines, about beneficiary procedures, about what happens when the primary beneficiary is hospitalized or incapacitated. They'd specifically asked about emergency access to policy benefits and expedited claim processing during medical crises. The inquiry had been made by someone claiming to be Marcus Thompson, my husband, providing accurate personal information that proved they had access to our private financial records. But Marcus had never mentioned reviewing my life insurance policy. He'd never mentioned any financial planning discussions that would require this level of detail about death benefits and claim procedures. I felt like I was solving a puzzle where each new piece revealed a more horrifying picture. The Thompson family hadn't just been planning to exclude me from their wealth. They'd been planning for my death. My accident hadn't been an opportunity they'd decided to exploit. It had been an outcome they'd been preparing for. The drunk driver who'd hit me might have been random, but someone in Marcus's family had been researching what would happen if I died. The strength I found in this moment surprised me. Instead of falling apart, I felt a cold, calculated fury that cut through my physical pain and emotional devastation. These people had underestimated me completely. They'd seen me as a weak outsider who could be manipulated or eliminated, but they'd forgotten that I was a successful marketing executive who'd built her career on strategic thinking and attention to detail. I spent the rest of that morning formulating a plan that would expose their entire scheme while protecting myself legally and financially. The leather portfolio contained everything I needed, not just evidence of their plotting, but also the tools to destroy their strategy completely. My client presentation wasn't just about marketing projections. It was about media strategy and public relations crisis management for a major corporation. The irony was perfect. I'd been preparing to pitch a campaign about family values and corporate branding to a company that prided itself on ethical business practices. The presentation materials included detailed research about how family scandals affect business, reputations, case studies about public relations disasters, and specific strategies for media management during crisis situations. Marcus arrived that afternoon with more gifts: expensive flowers, gourmet chocolates, a cashmere blanket for my hospital bed. His attentiveness felt performative now, like he was following a script designed to create the appearance of a devoted husband. When I thanked him for his thoughtfulness, he actually looked relieved, as if he'd been worried about my emotional state for reasons that had nothing to do with my recovery. "The doctors say you might be discharged by Christmas Eve," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "I thought we could have a quiet celebration at home, just the two of us. My family wants to give you time to fully recover before any big gatherings." The way he emphasized "just the two of us" suggested he was working hard to keep me isolated from outside perspectives. "That sounds perfect," I replied, matching his tone of loving concern while internally cataloging every lie he'd told me over the past week. "I've been thinking about how grateful I am for your family's support during all this. Maybe when I'm stronger, I could write thank you notes to everyone who's been thinking of me." Marcus's face went pale at this suggestion. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that," he said quickly. "Everyone understands you're focused on healing. There's no pressure for social obligations right now." His panic at the thought of me contacting his family members directly confirmed that he was desperately trying to control all communications between us. That evening, I made the phone call that would set everything in motion. Using the hospital phone instead of my personal cell, I contacted the insurance company directly to report the suspicious inquiry about my policy. I explained that I was hospitalized due to an accident and had discovered someone had been making unauthorized inquiries about my death benefits using my husband's identity. The insurance investigator who took my call was immediately concerned. "Mrs. Thompson, what you're describing could constitute insurance fraud, especially given the timing relative to your accident. We'll need to open a formal investigation immediately." Within hours, I had an official case number and a promise that all further inquiries about my policy would be flagged and investigated. The climax began to unfold on Christmas Eve morning when I was finally discharged from the hospital. Marcus had decorated our house beautifully, twinkling lights, fresh garland, our tree perfectly arranged with presents underneath. But instead of feeling joy at being home, I felt like I was entering enemy territory. Every kindness felt calculated. Every gesture seemed designed to keep me compliant and unsuspecting, while his family's plan moved into its final phase. "I thought we could have a quiet morning together," Marcus said, helping me settle onto the couch with pillows arranged to support my still healing ribs. "Then maybe this afternoon, if you're feeling up to it, my family could stop by for a brief visit. They've been so worried about you, and they have something special they want to share." The moment I'd been preparing for had arrived. "That sounds wonderful," I said, making sure my voice conveyed the gratitude and vulnerability they expected. "I've missed them so much. It'll be good to see everyone together again." Marcus's relief was visible. He thought I was still the naive woman who'd been desperately seeking his family's approval for 5 years. At exactly 2 p.m., the Thompson family arrived in force. Patricia swept in wearing her most expensive winter coat, carrying an enormous gift bag, and wearing the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. William followed, looking uncomfortable, but determined. David and Emma brought up the rear, Emma's face showing the same guilt and anxiety I'd seen during her hospital visits. "Quinn, darling," Patricia exclaimed, air-kissing my cheeks while carefully avoiding any actual physical contact that might acknowledge my injuries. "You look absolutely wonderful considering what you've been through. We've been so worried, haven't we, William?" Her performance was flawless, the concerned mother-in-law, the devoted family matriarch rallying around a crisis. William nodded stiffly. "Indeed, we're grateful you're recovering so well." His tone suggested he was reading from a script, fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing genuine emotion. David mumbled similar platitudes while Emma hung back, clearly uncomfortable with whatever was about to unfold. "We have something very special to share with you," Patricia continued, settling herself in our most expensive chair as if she were holding court. "Something that we hope will bring you great comfort and security during your continued recovery." She reached into the gift bag with theatrical flourish, withdrawing a manila envelope sealed with the Thompson family law firm's distinctive wax seal. "We've been doing some family financial planning," William interjected, his business voice taking over. "Given recent events in your medical situation, we realized it was time to make some important decisions about Marcus's future and his role in the family business." The way he emphasized recent events made it clear they viewed my accident as a convenient catalyst for changes they'd been planning. Marcus took the envelope from his mother with hands that were trembling slightly. "Quinn, my family has made an incredibly generous offer," he said, his voice carrying a strange mixture of excitement and guilt. "They want to buy us a new house, a beautiful place in Scottsdale, near their winter home. Somewhere warm where you can recover fully, away from Chicago winters and all the stress of city life." The envelope contained property deeds, mortgage documents, and legal papers that would relocate us permanently to Arizona, far from my job, my friends, my entire support system. But that wasn't the real revelation. The final document in the packet was a revised trust fund agreement that would give Marcus immediate access to his full inheritance, with one crucial condition. "There is one small requirement," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The trust fund modification requires that Marcus's spouse sign a comprehensive waiver regarding any future claims to Thompson family assets. It's really just a formality, a way to protect the family's generational wealth while ensuring you're both taken care of." The waiver was 50 pages of dense legal language, but I'd spent enough time reviewing financial documents to understand its true purpose. By signing, I would forfeit any claim to Marcus's inheritance, any community property rights to his trust fund, and any legal standing in Thompson family financial matters. I would become entirely dependent on their continued goodwill, with no legal protections if they decided to withdraw their support. "Of course, we understand this is a big decision," William added, pulling out his Mont Blanc pen with ceremonial precision. "But given your medical expenses and recovery needs, we thought the security of immediate financial resources would be appealing. The Scottsdale house is worth $2.8 million, and it would be yours free and clear. The public vindication. I'd been unconsciously preparing for arrived when I smiled broadly and reached for the pen. "This is so incredibly generous," I said, my voice filled with the gratitude they expected. "But before I sign anything this important, I think we should make sure everyone understands exactly what we're agreeing to." I pulled out my phone and opened the insurance company's investigation file, which now included recorded conversations with the person who'd made unauthorized inquiries about my death benefits. "I found something interesting while I was in the hospital," I said, watching their faces change as I explained about the life insurance investigation. The recording played clearly through my phone's speaker, Marcus's voice asking detailed questions about payout procedures, about what happens when a spouse dies in an accident, about expedited claim processing during medical emergencies. The timestamp showed the inquiry had been made 2 weeks before my accident, when I was perfectly healthy and had no reason to be reviewing insurance benefits. Patricia's face went ashen. William's business composure cracked completely. David looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd known about the financial planning, but not about the insurance fraud. Emma started crying softly, her guilt finally overwhelming her. "You stupid, greedy bastards," I said, my voice cutting through their stunned silence like a blade. "You thought I was some helpless victim you could manipulate while I was fighting for my life. You planned my financial destruction while I was unconscious in intensive care. You celebrated my absence while I was connected to machines. And you had the audacity to research my death benefits before I was even injured." The aftermath was swift and devastating for the Thompson family. Within 24 hours of my revelation, the insurance fraud investigation had expanded to include the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Marcus's unauthorized access to my personal financial information violated federal privacy laws, and his inquiries about death benefits while planning to relocate me away from my support system constituted conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The public vindication came when the story broke in the EI. Chicago Tribune's business section 3 days after Christmas. "Prominent family under investigation for insurance fraud scheme," ran alongside photos of the Thompson family's real estate empire and Marcus's nonprofit law firm. The article detailed how a family had used a car accident victim's hospitalization to plan financial manipulation and had researched her death benefits weeks before her near-fatal crash. Patricia's society friends abandoned her immediately. The charity boards that had been the center of her social identity asked for her resignation within a week. William's business reputation, built over decades of careful cultivation, crumbled as clients questioned whether they could trust a man who had plotted against his own daughter-in-law while she fought for her life in intensive care. Marcus tried to claim he'd been pressured by his family, that he'd never intended for things to go as far as they did. But the recorded insurance conversations, his participation in the family celebrations while I was hospitalized, and his lies about his family's absence during my recovery painted a clear picture of someone who had chosen financial gain over human decency. The divorce proceedings were remarkably straightforward. Marcus's attorney advised him to settle quickly and quietly to avoid additional criminal charges. I received half of all marital assets, including his trust fund distributions during our marriage, plus a substantial settlement from his family's insurance company to avoid a civil lawsuit for emotional distress and conspiracy. David and Emma's marriage didn't survive the revelation. Emma had been genuinely horrified to discover the full extent of the family's plotting, but her participation in the deception, the reconnaissance visits, the lies about family gatherings, the covering for Marcus's behavior, had destroyed David's trust in her judgment. She moved back to her father's house in Michigan within a month. The most satisfying consequence came when the IRS opened an investigation into the Thompson family's financial activities. The attempted trust fund manipulation had created a paper trail that revealed years of questionable tax strategies and asset hiding. William's real estate empire faced audits that would cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees and penalties. 3 months later, I was promoted to senior vice president at my marketing firm, largely due to the crisis management skills I'd demonstrated. During my personal ordeal, the client presentation I'd been working on before my accident, the one about family values and corporate branding, had been modified into a case study about surviving betrayal and rebuilding trust. It became one of our most successful campaigns. I moved into a beautiful downtown Chicago condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The space was entirely mine. No family photos I felt obligated to display, no traditions I felt pressured to maintain, no people I needed to constantly prove myself worthy of. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely in my own home. The physical healing had been relatively straightforward. My ribs mended, my lung function returned to normal, and the visible scars from the accident faded with time. But the emotional healing was more complex and ultimately more rewarding. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to value my own worth independently of others' approval, and to recognize manipulation disguised as family concern. Maria, the ICU nurse who had validated my concerns during the darkest moments, became an unexpected friend. She'd seen enough family crises to recognize genuine dysfunction when it occurred, and her support during my hospital stay had given me the courage to investigate rather than accept the lies I was being told. We met for coffee regularly, and she often said I was the strongest survivor she'd encountered in her nursing career. The insurance investigation concluded with Marcus pleading guilty to privacy violations and fraud conspiracy. He received 2 years of probation and community service, plus permanent exclusion from practicing law in Illinois. His nonprofit firm collapsed when donors learned about his criminal activities, and he eventually moved to Arizona to work in his father's diminished real estate business. I never signed the waiver that would have made me financially dependent on people who had celebrated my suffering. Instead, I built a life based on my own achievements, my own relationships, and my own definition of family. The Thompson name, which had once intimidated me with its social weight, became synonymous with fraud and family dysfunction in Chicago's business circles. Looking back, I realized that car accidents saved my life in ways that had nothing to do with medical intervention. It forced me to see clearly who truly cared about my well-being and who saw me as an obstacle to their financial plans. The drunk driver who hit me had been criminally negligent, but the family that celebrated my injuries while researching my death benefits had been far more dangerous to my long-term survival. Today, I work with other women who've discovered family betrayal during vulnerable moments. I've learned that my experience, while extreme, wasn't unique. Families sometimes use medical crises, financial difficulties, or personal traumas as opportunities to manipulate and control rather than support and protect. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were working against your interests? During your most vulnerable moments? Have you found the strength to rebuild your life after realizing that your biggest supporters were actually your greatest threats? I'd love to hear your stories of survival and recovery. Please share your experiences in the comments below.